to Joseph Wicker, the psychologist shown in the picture. Mr. Wicker is the worshipful master of Mount Washington Masonic Lodge number 642 in Mount Washington, Ohio. That means that he is the president of the Masonic Lodge in his hometown. The Catholic Church allows a Mason to determine which men are to become priests in the Catholic religion. Mr. Wicker said that he no longer considers himself a practicing Catholic, but practices what he calls Rosicrucian experiments. The Rosicrucians are an old fraternity like the Masonic Lodge that teaches all things are noble through the use of reason. They have been officially condemned by the Catholic Church. Mr. Wicker also reports that he has not yet practiced what he calls Rosicrucian time travel. He further stated that he believes in reincarnation. Ask yourself what type of priest he's going to recommend. Assume for a moment what he might think of a future Catholic priest who believes that the Masonic order is a concealed Luciferian conspiracy. Do you honestly believe that he will get a good recommendation from the good psychologist? I hardly think so. Yet this is the man who is going to decide if a man is suitable for priesthood in the Catholic Church in Cincinnati. The article does not say how the Catholic Church selected Mr. Wicker, but the article said that they did. It is time to offend the Catholics once again. This is a picture of a Catholic priest during a Mass raising up the disc wafer to the top of his arms. I remember that when I was a Catholic, bells would ring when the priest got the wafer to this position, and we would all thank God for this supposed symbol of Jesus Christ. But I now contend that the round wafer represents a symbol of the sun god in circle form, and as it rises in the morning, we worship it as a symbol of the rising sun god, Lucifer. Someone in the past added this ceremony into the Catholic Mass, and they were probably only a few who understood and objected. And those who put the sun symbol into the Mass probably raised a furor that someone would think such a thing about the Catholic Church, and those in opposition quietly stopped their protests. And it is still in the Mass today without anyone understanding what it really means. I'd like to make one last comment. The Bible says that Jesus broke bread at the Last Supper in front of all of his apostles. He was eating his last meal before he knew he would be crucified. And it is not reasonable to believe that he was eating paper-thin round wafers. He was eating bread in the form customary to the time, probably in the shape of a round or oblong loaf. He used the broken bread to symbolize his broken body at crucifixion. Many traditional fundamentalist churches use a loaf of bread, and it is broken as it is passed around by its members. But here is why some feel it is a symbol of something far more sinister. According to the book Illuminati 666, a round disc wafer was an Egyptian symbol of the sun. The thin disc-shaped wafer was a symbol of Lucifer, the sun god. The disc was an ancient symbol of Lucifer, and the Catholic Church uses the round disc wafer supposedly as a remembrance of the bread used at the Last Supper. They claim that their God is the God of the Bible, but there's nothing that I can find that claims that a disc had anything to do with Jesus or the God of the Bible. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the Luciferian author of The Secret Doctrine, confirms this on page 536 of her book. She writes, quote, "The idea of representing the hidden deity by the circumference of a circle is one of the oldest symbols. So it appears that only the loyal members of the Catholic Church do not know what it means. So the question remains, why has the Catholic Church adopted the use of pagan or Luciferic symbols in their worship? We have been told that the Church compromised their position centuries ago to get pagans into the Catholic Church. They were saying that their symbols led them to the same God that the pagans were worshiping, and therefore they were encouraging the pagans to join their church. But that is no longer the case. The Catholic Church today is not appealing to pagans to join it because they are pagans. So they could certainly eliminate all of these pagan symbols from their religion, but they have chosen not to do so. I'd like to continue now with my discussion of the secret societies, including the Masonic Lodge. One of the most recent secret societies to surface is the Italian Masonic group known as P2, P as in Petunia, and 2 the number. and that stands for Propaganda Masonica Due, or abbreviated by the media into P2. This is the article that appeared in our local newspaper that announced the discovery of the secret Masonic Lodge. The article said this about the Masonic group in Italy. It surfaced in 1981 when it toppled the government of Premier Arnaldo Forlani. By the way, Forlani was the gentleman shown in the picture in the article, and attempted to replace it with an authoritarian government. This article appeared 4 days later after the first and showed that captured membership lists showed 953 names, including over 100 Catholics assigned to the Vatican in Vatican City in service to the Pope. If you are a Catholic, you know that you cannot be both a Mason and a Catholic unless you are a member of the Masonic group known as P2, and then your membership is permissible. P2 is the successor to P1, created by Giuseppe Mazzini, the head of the Illuminati and a Mason. Now this is a picture of Giuseppe Mazzini, an Italian revolutionary and member of the Masons. Mr. Mazzini has an interesting past. We in America know very little about him, but he is an extremely important individual in the history of the world, because Mazzini also created the Mafia. The word Mafia is taken from the first initials of the Italian slogan, and I'll pronounce it as well as I can. Mazzini, meaning Giuseppe Mazzini, the founder of the Mafia, autorisi, forte, insurde, avolamente, and those Latin words, or those Italian words, translate into Mazzini authorizes theft, arson, and poisoning. In other words, Mafia members have the permission of its founder to engage in any activity that will enable them to further the work of their organization. Remember specifically that poisoning was authorized by Mazzini. What Mr. Mazzini was teaching his subordinates was that the ends justify the means. The classic morality without any morality of the Masons, the Illuminati, the Communists, and the New Age. What he was saying was that its members could use whatever assisted them in furthering the goals of the conspiracy. Mr. Mazzini was also a member of the Carabinieri, founded in 1815 to, quote, completely annihilate Christianity, unquote. Mazzini was also a member of the Illuminati. In fact, he was the European head of that group. Therefore, Mazzini's resume, if he submitted one to an employer, would read, I am or was a member of the Illuminati, the creator of the Mafia, the founder of the P1 Masonic group, a member of the Carabinieri, and a personal friend of Albert Pike, the Sovereign Grand Commander of the Masonic Lodge throughout the world. And to show you that the P2 group believed in morality, in amorality, without morality inside the Illuminati, they poisoned John Paul I, as shown here. John Paul I was the Pope just before the current Pope John Paul II. This is a book entitled In God's Name, written by David Yallop. In this book, the author builds the case that the P2 group of Masons was involved in the murder by poisoning of Pope John Paul I, who served only, notice this, only 33 days. Notice once again, as I said, the Pope was murdered while in office only a symbolic number of 33 days. Yallop details the evidence that any or all of 6 key suspects, 2 cardinals, 1 bishop, 2 bankers, and the head of the P2 itself had motives to kill the Pope. Yallop states that the P2 has interlocks with the Mafia. And if that is true, it is because both groups have the same founder, Giuseppe Mazzini. The Pope had discovered a fraudulent deal wherein the Church had bought $1 billion worth of, notice by the way, billion with the B, billion dollars worth of phony bonds from the bankers in the P2. The bankers were transferring $1 billion out of the Vatican. One of his first acts as Pope was to start working on plans to remove all of these Masons from the Church, and he died with those papers in his hands. Yallop writes, the circumstances of his death and the discovery of his body make it abundantly clear that the Vatican perpetrated a cover-up. There was no autopsy on Pope John Paul I, and the Pope's body was immediately embalmed, and the papers have disappeared. By the way, Yallop wrote in 1985 that his successor, Pope John Paul II, had not made any of the changes about the P2 group that his predecessor was going to make. That means that as of 1985, the Masons were still inside the Vatican. But there was no conspiracy. According to this article, a Vatican cardinal named Silvio Otti reported that the Pope was in poor health and that he was, quote, struck down by the weight of his job, unquote. He went on to report that he defended the Vatican's decision not to provide an autopsy on his body. He said that everyone would say that we were, quote, doing the autopsy because there was something suspicious, unquote. I always thought that was the reason that you did autopsies, because you felt that there was something suspicious in the death of the deceased person. But we see here that that is the reason not to do an autopsy. Each of you will have to decide for yourself whether or not the Pope was murdered. Next, I'd like to talk about someone else who appears to have been murdered by the P2 Masonic Lodge. Perhaps as you remember, Grace Kelly died on September the 14th, 1982, when her car went out of control and plunged off a cliff. As you remember, Grace Kelly married Prince Rainier of Monaco, a nearby neighbor of Italy, and the place where the P2 frequently met. There are charges being made in Europe today that Princess Grace, a Roman Catholic, was murdered by the P2 Masonic group because she had discovered the fraudulent $1 billion deal in the secret P2 organization. The theory is that as a woman known worldwide as a Catholic, Grace could have blown the story wide open if she had gone public with it. They must have really feared Grace Kelly because she could have exposed the P2 group inside the Catholic Church. The theory holds that the brakes on her car had been tampered with, and that is why her car went off the road over the cliff. It is known that immediately after the crash that killed her, her car, shown here, was covered with a tarp by the police from Monaco, removed, and then immediately crushed into a block of scrap metal. The evidence has disappeared, so no one knows for sure. Her car crashed in France and was removed by the police from Monaco without France's permission and before it could be examined by the French police. It sounds to me like someone knew she was going to drive the car without brakes and that the evidence was destroyed quickly before someone found out that the car had been tampered with. One of the indications that she might have been murdered is the fact that Grace's brother, Jack, shown on the left, and her brother-in-law died on Philadelphia streets within blocks of each other, within hours of each other, on the same day, March the 2nd, 1985, of so-called heart attacks. Both were carrying on their own investigation into Grace's strange death. It sounds like murder to me. There's also some evidence that the P2 might have been busy in America also murdering people who might have been in a position to break the story of the $1 billion scandal. This is a transcript of a TV program called Close-Up that aired on February the 14th, 1983 on the public broadcasting system. This program was hosted by Jessica Savage, the author of the TV program. About 8 months later, Miss Savage and Martin Fishbein, her boyfriend, died in a rather mysterious car accident. This article said that the boyfriend drove his station wagon north in the parking lot of the restaurant they were leaving, past two signs which said no cars were allowed, and continued for about 40 or 50 feet where it fell into a ditch filled with water. The article did not say whether police investigated whether or not the gas pedal had been jammed so that Mr. Fishbein could not control the car. But sounds like that was what happened, and the reason it might have happened is because Jessica Savage had not finished her investigation into the P2 scandal. But we'll never know. Those who are critical of those of us trying to expose the P2 scandal often claim that the P2 Lodge is not a Masonic lodge. But the truth of the matter is that they were a recognized part of the regular Grand Orient Lodge of Italy, itself recognized by the Grand Lodge of England in 1972. It has been a Masonic lodge for nearly a century. It is my contention, after nearly 30 years of research into this Luciferian conspiracy, that it has infiltrated into every fabric of our society, including our religions. Now please notice that I am not saying that the Catholics are conspirators. I am saying that this conspiracy has infiltrated the Catholic religion and has placed its symbols all around us. And we simply do not understand that they are symbols of something far more sinister. And even if we did, we probably wouldn't believe